In September 1953, a Capuchin archivist named Father Benedetto Nardella opened a sealed envelope that had been sitting untouched for 4 years in a cabinet at the Friary of San Giovanni Rotondo. Inside were 3 handwritten letters from Padre Pio, letters that had been quietly set aside by the previous archivist with a single handwritten note attached to the envelope. The note read simply, "For later, when they are ready." Father Benedetto read all 3 letters in a single sitting. By the time he reached the final page of the 3rd letter, his hands were trembling, not from fear, from the weight of what he had just understood. What Padre Pio had written about purgatory in those letters, what he had actually seen, what the souls had told him, what they were pleading for the living to understand, was nothing like what most Catholics hear from the pulpit on Sunday morning. Nothing like it. It was more urgent, more specific, more demanding, and that is precisely why those letters were never published in full. Stay with me today, because what I am about to share with you changes everything about how you should be praying for your deceased loved ones. If you have a mother, a father, a husband, a child, a dear friend who has passed, this is not background information for a quiet Sunday afternoon. This is urgent. This is happening right now. The people you have buried are not simply waiting. They are in a process of purification that is real, that involves real suffering, and that your prayer can directly shorten. Hold on, because we have not even reached the most difficult part yet. Let me tell you something that most people do not realize. The vast majority of Catholics who attend Sunday Mass, who say the Rosary, who wear the brown scapula, who would call themselves devout, the vast majority of them have never been given the full picture of what purgatory actually is. They have a vague idea. It is a place of purification. It is temporary. It ends with heaven. They have heard that we should pray for the dead. Perhaps they light a candle on All Souls' Day, or have a Mass offered when someone close to them passes away. But Padre Pio, a man who was visited by souls from purgatory throughout his entire priesthood, a man who celebrated Mass for those souls every single Monday of his priestly life without a single exception. Padre Pio said something that I believe most priests today would hesitate to repeat from the pulpit. He said, "More souls of the dead than the living climb this mountain." Think carefully about what that means. The mountain he was referring to was the Gargano, the hill on which San Giovanni Rotondo stood, a friary that received tens of thousands of living pilgrims every year, people who traveled from across Italy and across the world to meet Padre Pio, to confess to him, to ask for his blessing, to be in his presence. And Padre Pio was saying that the majority of his visitors were not those living Catholics standing in line for confession. They were the dead. The souls in purgatory coming to him because they needed something, because they were suffering, because someone needed to hear their cry. My name is Margaret, and I have been a practicing Catholic my entire life. 62 years of Mass, Rosary, confession, novenas, pilgrimages. I was born in Coventry, and I grew up in a faith community that was serious and faithful and loving. But I will tell you honestly, until I read everything I could find about Padre Pio's encounters with the souls in purgatory, until I sat with the primary sources and the testimonies of those who lived alongside him, I did not understand the weight of what it means to pray for the dead. I had been doing it all my life, but I had been doing it, as I suspect many of you have been doing it, with a kind of comfortable assumption underneath, that the dead are essentially all right, that they are with God now or nearly there, that my prayers were a kind gesture, a traditional act of piety, a way of honoring their memory, a spiritual flower laid on a spiritual grave. What Padre Pio knew, and what those 3 letters communicate with devastating clarity, is that the dead are not simply all right, and your prayer is not a flower, it is a fire extinguisher. What you are about to hear is not speculation or pious sentiment. It is drawn from documented testimonies, from Padre Pio's own published and unpublished correspondence, and from the accounts of the priests, brothers, and lay people who served alongside him and recorded what they witnessed. And when I tell you it will change the way you end every single day, I mean that literally. To understand the revelation in those 3 letters, you need to understand first who Father Benedetto Nardella was and what he was doing when he opened that envelope. Father Benedetto had arrived at San Giovanni Rotondo in 1952, assigned as the new friary archivist, a meticulous man trained as a historian before he entered religious life, tasked with organizing the enormous volume of correspondence and documentation that had accumulated around Padre Pio over the previous 3 decades. By 1953, Padre Pio had been a priest for 34 years. His mail alone ran to hundreds of letters per week, arriving from every corner of the Catholic world. His stigmata had been documented and examined by physicians. His bilocation had been reported and recorded. His ability to read souls in the confessional had made him the most sought-after confessor in Italy, perhaps in the world. The archive Father Benedetto inherited was organized in broad categories: incoming correspondence, outgoing correspondence, medical documentation, ecclesiastical correspondence, testimonies of supernatural phenomena. It was in the outgoing correspondence cabinet, specifically in the section labeled Father Agostino Daniele, Spiritual Director, that he found the sealed envelope. Father Agostino Daniele was Padre Pio's longtime confessor and spiritual director, a man to whom Padre Pio had written with extraordinary openness about the most intimate dimensions of his spiritual life since his earliest years as a priest. The published portions of their correspondence already constituted a remarkable window into Padre Pio's interior world. But this envelope, Father Benedetto quickly realized, had never been included in the published collections. Someone had set it aside. The note in Father Ignazio's handwriting, Father Ignazio de Cerignola, the previous archivist, said only, "For later, when they are ready." There was no date on the note. Father Ignazio had died in 1951, leaving the question of when later might arrive, and who exactly needed to be ready, permanently unanswered. Father Benedetto opened the envelope. Inside were 3 folded letters, each several pages long, written in Padre Pio's distinctive hand, large, slightly labored, the writing of a man whose wounded palms made every stroke of the pen an act of patience. He settled at his desk and began to read. The first letter was dated November 2nd, 1949, All Souls Day, and it began with a description that stopped Father Benedetto's breath entirely. Padre Pio wrote that on the night of November 1st, the eve of the Feast of the Dead, after the long day of confessions and masses, he had been visited in his cell by a group of souls. Not one soul, a group. He described them as appearing like men and women dressed in their ordinary clothing, but translucent, as though made of very thin glass through which something was burning without ever consuming. He wrote that they communicated not with words, but through a direct placing of knowledge into his mind, a form of spiritual impression he had experienced many times before, and that what they placed there was not a simple request for prayers. It was a lament, and the lament was this: the living do not understand what we are going through, and they do not understand what they could do for us. But it was what came next in the letter that made Father Benedetto set the pages down and sit very still for a long time. Padre Pio wrote that these souls had shown him the nature of their suffering, and he wrote that it was different from what most Catholics imagine. They were not suffering primarily from fire, he wrote. They were suffering from clarity. This is something I have thought about for many years since I first encountered it in Padre Pio's writings, and I want to make sure I explain it in the way he described it, because it matters enormously. When he said they were suffering from clarity, he meant this. Each soul, upon entering purgatory, was given what he called the complete vision. In a single instant, with perfect and inescapable clarity, they saw their entire earthly life. Not a summary, not the general shape of it. Every moment, every choice they had made, and every choice they had avoided, every word they had spoken, and every word they should have spoken and had not. Every person they had loved, and every person they had failed to love when the opportunity was present. But that, the vision of their failures and sins, was not the deepest source of the suffering. The deepest suffering came from seeing the other side of their life, the grace, every grace they had been offered, every moment when God had sent them an opening, a prompting to act with generosity, an inspiration toward prayer, a gentle inner nudging toward reconciliation with someone they had wronged and they had turned away. Not always dramatically, not always consciously, sometimes simply out of distraction, out of the comfortable habit of putting off what the soul knew it should do, out of the 1,000 small daily choices to remain comfortable rather than respond to the movement of grace. In purgatory, every one of those turned-away graces became visible in its full weight and consequence. The soul saw, with absolute precision, exactly what would have been different in their own spiritual life, in the lives of the people around them, in the world, had they responded to each of those graces instead of letting them pass. And the soul understood, with a clarity that allowed no excuses and invited no self-pity, that it was entirely and freely responsible. Padre Pio wrote, "They do not cry out in anger at God. They do not blame. Their suffering is pure and holy. It is the suffering of perfect love that has finally understood its own failures and that cannot yet return to the source of that love because the purification is not complete. But what they want the living to know, what they placed in my heart with an urgency I cannot describe, is that the purification can be shortened. It can be shortened by the prayers, the masses, the sacrifices, and the acts of love that the living offer for them." Father Benedetto set down the letter. He sat for a long time, then he picked it up again and continued reading. The second letter was dated March 19th, 1951, the Feast of St. Joseph. It was the longest of the three, and it went deeper into something Padre Pio had been observing and pondering for years. He wrote to Father Agostino, "What I have come to understand through these encounters over the span of my priesthood is that the living do not know the power they hold in their hands. They have been given a gift so enormous that if they truly comprehended it, they would never again pray for the dead as an afterthought. They would never again omit the prayer for the dead at the end of a busy day because they were tired. Every Mass offered for a soul in purgatory, every rosary said in their name, every act of charity or patience offered consciously for their release. These do not merely comfort the soul at a distance, the way we might comfort someone in a foreign country by sending them a letter. They reach into the process of purification itself. They do not merely console, they shorten." Father Benedetto underlined this passage, then he underlined it again. Padre Pio was not offering a vague devotional sentiment. He was making a specific claim based on specific, repeated, direct experience with the souls who visited him. The prayers of the living have a concrete, measurable effect on the souls in purgatory. Not symbolic, not merely traditional, effective in the way that medicine is effective, specifically, directly, with the power to reduce suffering and shorten the time of purification. And he was saying that most Catholics had no idea. I want you to hold that, because the third letter, the one that Father Ignazio had apparently decided was too much for ordinary Catholics to receive without pastoral preparation. The third letter is where the revelation becomes something I believe every person watching this needs to hear today. But before I reach it, I need to tell you about a specific soul that Padre Pio described in this second letter, because this is where the story stops being history and becomes a mirror held up to our own lives. His name in the letter was given only as Father D, a priest. Padre Pio described receiving a visit from this soul in the autumn of 1950. Father D had died earlier that year, a parish priest from northern Italy who had, by every external measure, lived a good and faithful priestly life. He had celebrated Mass faithfully for more than 4 decades. He had heard confessions with care and regularity. He had baptized children, buried the dead, anointed the sick, taught catechism. He had not been a spectacular priest, but he had been a steady one, a reliable one, a priest who showed up and served and did not abandon his people. But Father D had a particular habit that he had carried through his entire priesthood without recognizing it as a spiritual problem. He had consistently minimized purgatory in his sermons and in his pastoral conversations, not denied it. He had never contradicted the teaching of the Church. But when All Souls' Day arrived each year, his sermons were gentle and brief, a reminder of the traditional prayers, a few words of encouragement to attend the special Mass, an assurance that God's mercy was great. When parishioners came to him weeping over someone they had lost, asking whether their loved one was suffering, whether they were all right, Father D had always been reassuring. "They are with God now," he would say. "They are at peace. God is merciful. Do not worry too much." When it came time to encourage his parishioners to offer masses and dedicated prayers for the deceased, he had done it, but quietly, without urgency, without the kind of pastoral insistence that might have made his people genuinely understand what they were doing and why it mattered. Father D had done all of this out of kindness. He had not wanted to frighten his parishioners with vivid images of spiritual suffering. He believed he was being merciful. He believed he was protecting them from anxiety that might not be spiritually healthy. In purgatory, he was shown what his mercy had actually cost. Soul after soul from his parish, people he had known personally, people he had loved as a father loves his children, people whose baptisms and first communions and weddings and funerals he had celebrated over 40 years, passed through purgatory carrying unnecessary weight, suffering longer than they needed to. Because no one, in 40 years of Sunday homilies and pastoral conversations and deathbed visitations, had told them clearly and urgently and repeatedly that the prayers of the living matter, that every Mass offered for the dead is a direct spiritual intervention, that the souls in purgatory are not simply resting in some comfortable intermediate place, waiting passively for their time to be done. They are in a state of active purification that involves real suffering, the most holy suffering, the suffering of love becoming fully pure, but suffering that can be genuinely shortened by the acts of the living. Padre Pio wrote, "He wept without tears, the way those in purgatory weep, the weeping of those who have passed beyond regret and self-pity into something more terrible and more clean, the weeping of perfect understanding. He showed me faces, the faces of his parishioners who were there in that purification longer than they needed to be. And he said to me, tell them, tell the living, tell them to pray for us, not because it is a pious tradition that honors our memory, because it works, because we are here and we can feel it when you pray, because each prayer that reaches us is like a breath of cold water in the middle of a fire. Tell them, I have to stop here." When I first read this account, I had been given an Italian translation of Father Benedetto's written testimony about these letters, and I was sitting at my kitchen table in Coventry on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I had to put it down and simply sit with it for several minutes because I realized something about myself. I realized that for 60-odd years of Catholic life, I had been praying for the dead with a quiet, comfortable assumption underneath all of it, that they were probably fine, that they were probably with God or nearly there, that my prayers were a loving habit rather than an urgent act of mercy for someone actually suffering. I've experienced this shift myself, and I can tell you There is a profound difference between praying for the dead because it is what Catholics do, and praying for the dead because you have genuinely understood that someone you love is in a process of purification and that your prayer reaches them directly and concretely. The first is a habit. The second is an act of love so fierce and specific that it changes you as you do it. Hold on, because I have not yet told you about the third letter, the one Father Ignazio could not decide whether to release. And it is the third letter that explains something about our own time, about why what Padre Pio knew and witnessed was not passed on to ordinary Catholics with the urgency it deserved. The third letter was dated January 15th, 1952, and it was the one that had given Father Ignazio the most trouble. It was the longest of the three letters, and parts of it showed signs of struggle, passages crossed out and rewritten, places where Padre Pio had clearly stopped and reconsidered how much to say. In this letter, Padre Pio described something he had received, not through his own vision, but through information communicated to him by one of the souls who had visited him. A soul who, in life, had held a position of responsibility within the Vatican's administrative structures. Padre Pio did not identify this soul by name, but he described him as someone who had died with a great burden of unfinished spiritual business, someone who had come to him precisely because Padre Pio was known to intercede for souls in purgatory, and someone who needed him to understand something and to act on it. This soul told Padre Pio that in the decades following the First Vatican Council, there had been a deliberate pastoral decision at high levels of the Church to moderate the language and emphasis used in teaching about purgatory to ordinary Catholics. Not to deny the doctrine, not to alter it in any way, but to soften the presentation of it, to emphasize the mercy and the hope and the temporary nature of purgatory, while moderating, not eliminating but moderating, the emphasis on its reality as a state of genuine suffering, and on the direct and powerful relationship between the prayers of the living and the release of souls. The reasoning behind this decision, as this soul communicated it to Padre Pio, was pastoral in its intention. The vivid and demanding accounts of purgatory found in the writings of the great mystics, St. Catherine of Genoa's treatise on purgatory, St. Teresa of Avila's accounts of interceding for souls, St. Faustina Kowalska's visions in the Divine Mercy Diary, the numerous testimonies of souls appearing to holy men and women throughout the history of the Church. These accounts were intense. They were graphic in the sense of being specific and concrete about suffering. There was genuine concern within certain circles of church leadership in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that if ordinary Catholics were presented with this picture of purgatory in its full urgency, something unhealthy might result. Either a morbid preoccupation with death and the dead at the expense of engagement with the living world, or worse, a kind of spiritual paralysis, an overwhelming anxiety about the state of every person who had ever died, an anxiety that might actually obstruct rather than nourish genuine Catholic life. So the emphasis was shifted, not by any formal decree, not by any single document or decision, but by a gradual cultural preference within Catholic preaching and catechesis for a gentler, more consoling presentation of the afterlife. One that reassured the bereaved rather than mobilizing them. One that honored the memory of the dead rather than urgently recruiting the living into active intercession for them. Padre Pio wrote, "The soul said to me with the specific anguish that only those in purgatory can carry, this decision cost us. It has been costing us for decades. The prayers that should reach us do not arrive because the living do not understand the urgency. They believe we are resting. We are not resting. We are purifying. It is not rest. It is the most holy fire that exists, and their prayers cool it. Their masses, their rosaries, their small sacrifices, these things reach us and they work, and fewer of them are being offered because fewer and fewer of the living have been told that it matters." This is what Father Ignazio had been unable to decide whether to release, not because it was theologically false. The doctrine of purgatory, the doctrine of the efficacy of prayers for the dead, the doctrine of the communion of saints connecting the living and the dead, none of this was in any way contradicted by what Padre Pio had written. On the contrary, everything he described was perfectly orthodox, perfectly consistent with what the Council of Trent had defined in 1563 and what every Catholic catechism had always taught. But it named something uncomfortable, something that Father Ignazio, sitting with these letters in the late 1940s, could not entirely decide how to handle. It named the possibility that the people of God had been shielded, with the best of intentions, with genuine pastoral love, from the full urgency of a truth that they needed, and that the souls of their loved ones were paying a price for that protection. Father Benedetto, having read all 3 letters, went to find Padre Pio. He found him in the church after the morning mass, kneeling before the crucifix in his private prayer. Father Benedetto waited until Padre Pio was aware of his presence. Padre Pio always knew when someone was waiting for him without turning to look. And then he approached quietly. "Father," he said, "the 3 letters to Father Agostino, the ones Father Ignazio set aside, I have read them." Padre Pio looked at him. "And," he said, Father Benedetto said, "Father, is it true what the soul described about the pastoral decision to moderate the teaching, about why it happened?" Padre Pio was silent for a long moment, not the silence of someone thinking of an answer, but the silence of someone who had long since arrived at an answer and was now deciding how much of it to speak. Then he said, "I cannot speak for the intentions of those who made that decision. I will not judge them. The Church is guided by the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit does not abandon her even when her servants make mistakes. But I can tell you what I know from my own experience." He paused. "The souls in purgatory are not interested in institutional history," he said. "They are not interested in the reasons why the living are not praying for them as urgently as they should. They are interested in one thing only, that you pray for them, that you offer Mass for them, that you say their names before God, that you sacrifice something small, something genuinely small, something that costs you no great effort, and offer it for their release. They want to be remembered with the urgency they deserve, not the gentle afterthought they usually receive." He turned back toward the crucifix. "The Church has not hidden this truth," he said quietly. "It is in every prayer for the dead. It is in every Requiem Mass. It is in the office of the dead. It is on every All Souls' Day, in every November, in every candle lit before every altar, in every parish in the world. The question is not whether the Church has told you. The question is whether you have heard it as if it were real." He paused again. "Because it is real," he said. "The people you have buried are real. Their purification is real, and your prayer is real. There is a document in the Vatican archives that adds a further layer to this picture. In the files of the Holy Office, now the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, there exists a correspondence file from 1963 that includes 3 separate references to Padre Pio's reported encounters with souls of the deceased. This file, portions of which have been made available to researchers since the partial opening of the Vatican archives relating to the pontificate of Pius XIII, contains a formal notation from the theological staff of the Holy Office to the effect that Padre Pio's accounts of purgatory and his intercession for souls had been examined and found to contain nothing contrary to Catholic faith or morals. In other words, the Vatican had looked at what Padre Pio was reporting. They had examined his descriptions of the souls who visited him, his accounts of what they communicated, his insistence on the direct and powerful effect of prayers and masses for the dead. They had looked at all of it and declared it orthodox, and they had filed it. Not suppressed it, not condemned it, filed it, placed it in the category of private revelation, valid, potentially edifying for the faithful, but not formally required to be proclaimed from every pulpit on every Sunday. A rich gold vein of spiritual truth, quietly catalogued and stored. Father Benedetto carried the knowledge of those 3 letters for the rest of his life. He made careful, handwritten copies before eventually placing the originals in the formal archive. He never published them in a way that would have brought them to wide public attention, but he spoke about them to priests, to sisters, to lay people who came to him over the decades with that particular grief of those who have lost someone and are not sure whether their prayers are reaching them. And the same thing happened every single time he shared what Padre Pio had written. People were shaken, and then people prayed, specifically, urgently, with an intention and a focus that had been absent before, with names, with real acts of small sacrifice, with mass intentions requested in the morning before a busy day, rather than thought of vaguely at Christmas or All Souls. And many of those people reported, quietly, privately, with the particular catch in the voice that comes when something genuinely real has happened, that they felt the difference. Not a miraculous vision, not an extraordinary sign, simply a deepening of peace, a sense of connection restored, a certainty that what they were doing was reaching someone who needed it. You just received something that most Catholics, even faithful, devout, mass-attending Catholics, have never been given with this kind of urgency or specificity. You heard about Father Benedetto and the 3 sealed letters. You heard what Padre Pio had directly witnessed, that purgatory is not a comfortable waiting room, but a state of real purification in which the prayers of the living have a direct and concrete effect. You heard about Father D, indeed the faithful priest, who loved his people and protected them from the full truth, and who spent his own time in purgatory watching the cost of that protection in the faces of his parishioners. This channel exists because of one conviction, that these truths deserve to be spoken with the weight they actually carry. Padre Pio himself said that those who spread divine truth receive a special intercession, not because of any particular merit, but because it is a work of mercy for the dead who cannot speak for themselves, and for the living who are doing the best they can with the information they have been given. If this video has reached you at a moment when you have been thinking about someone you have lost, a mother, a father, a husband, a child, a friend, and you have been wondering quietly whether your prayers for them actually matter, then consider the super thanks button as a way of saying, yes, keep going. These revelations need to keep reaching people who are grieving and who do not know the power they hold in their hands. You are not just a viewer. You are part of the chain of prayer that connects the living to the dead. Become part of those who keep Padre Pio's most urgent message alive and audible. I am going to give you something specific and practical right now, before this video ends. Not a general encouragement to pray more, specific, practical, something you can do today. Padre Pio's most consistent and repeated counsel about the souls in purgatory reduces to 3 actions. They are drawn from his letters, his homilies, and the direct testimony of those who knew him and recorded his words faithfully. The first is this: name them. Padre Pio valued no prayer for the dead more highly than the prayer that named the person specifically. Not all the souls in purgatory. That prayer has its own value, and he prayed it constantly. But the soul of your mother, the soul of your father, the soul of your husband or your wife, the soul of the child you lost, the soul of the friend who died before you could say what you needed to say, the soul of the person whose death left something unresolved between you. Say their name, out loud if you can manage it. Bring that person out of the anonymous category of the dead and into your conscious love, and bring them before God specifically, individually, by name. Padre Pio said, God knows every soul, But when you name them before God, you are doing something they can no longer do for themselves. You are advocating for them. You are standing before the throne and saying, "This one, this specific beloved one, have mercy on this one." That act of specific intercession is, in Padre Pio's understanding, of a different order entirely from the general prayer for the dead. It is personal. It is intimate. It draws on the love you actually had for that person. And that love, directed by faith, reaches directly into the purification they are undergoing. The second is this: offer something small, not a great sacrifice, not an extraordinary spiritual feat that requires unusual preparation or exceptional willpower. Something genuinely small, genuinely ordinary, genuinely part of the texture of your daily life. The cup of tea you do not drink this morning, offered for them. The irritation you absorb rather than express, offered for them. The 10 minutes of sleep you sacrifice to say a decade of the rosary at the end of a long day, offered for them. The sharp word you chose not to speak, offered for them. Padre Pio was entirely practical about this. He had no patience for the idea that only grand gestures reach purgatory. He said, in substance, it does not need to be magnificent. It needs to be intentional. Take what you have, any small discomfort, any ordinary act of patience, any tiny sacrifice, and say clearly in your heart, "Lord, I offer this for the soul of this person. Let it count toward their release." And that intention transforms an ordinary moment into an act of intercession. The smallness does not diminish its value. The intention and the love it carries are what matters. The third is this: offer a Mass for them. This is the most powerful thing a living Catholic can do for the dead. It is also, Padre Pio observed repeatedly, the most underused. He was unequivocal about this. A Mass offered for a specific soul in purgatory is, in his words, an intervention of divine mercy of the highest order possible through human action. Not a symbolic gesture. An intervention. If you have a deceased loved one on your heart, particularly someone who died suddenly without the opportunity for final confession or last rites, someone whose spiritual life was troubled or distant from the Church, someone whose death left you with a weight of unresolved grief that you have never quite been able to put down, offering a Mass for them is not a nice traditional gesture. It is, according to everything Padre Pio taught and experienced and witnessed over 5 decades of priesthood, a direct and powerful act of mercy for a soul that is suffering and that cannot help itself. You can do this today. You can call your parish this morning and request a Mass intention in the name of someone you have loved and lost. In most parishes, the stipend is small, a few dollars, a few pounds. And the effect, according to Padre Pio and to the consistent teaching of the Church, extends into eternity. Do not wait for All Souls' Day. Do not wait for the anniversary of their death. Do not wait for a moment when you feel especially prepared or especially holy or especially ready to do something religious. They are not waiting for your readiness. They are waiting for your prayer. Padre Pio celebrated his Monday Masses for the souls in purgatory, for the entirety of his priesthood. 52 years, every single Monday, without a single interruption, even when he was ill. Even when his stigmata made the celebration of Mass an act of physical suffering. Even in the years of Vatican restriction, when he was forbidden from hearing confessions or corresponding with his spiritual children, the Monday Mass for the dead continued unchanged. He understood something that most of us are only beginning to grasp, that the boundary between the living and the dead is not sealed. It is permeable to love, to prayer, to sacrifice, to the offering of the Holy Mass. We are not separated from our deceased loved ones by an impassable wall. We are separated by a different quality of time, a different mode of existence, but not ever, by the reach of genuine prayer. Pray, hope, and don't worry, Padre Pio said. That is perhaps his most famous counsel, but listen to what it means in full. It means pray, really pray, specifically, urgently, with the knowledge of what your prayer reaches. Hope, not as a vague optimism, but as a theological virtue directed at God's mercy, which is real and which is active right now in the purification of those you love. And don't worry, not because everything is automatically fine, but because your action is not futile. Your prayer reaches them, your mass is heard. Your named intercession arrives. Start tonight. Say the name of someone you have loved and lost. Say it out loud. Say, Lord, have mercy on the soul of this person I loved. Shorten their purification. Let your mercy reach them through this prayer I am offering now with everything I have. Do this, not next Sunday, not at Christmas, now, tonight, before you sleep. The people you have buried are not simply waiting in comfortable peace for their time to be done. They are in a fire of holy purification, and your love, made into prayer, made into the offering of Mass, made into the small daily sacrifices of ordinary life consciously offered for them, your love reaches them. It cools the fire. It shortens the journey. This is what Padre Pio witnessed for 52 years. This is what the souls who climbed his mountain came to tell him. This is what he spent his life acting on, every single Monday morning without fail. Now you know it too, and you know what to do. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever prayed for a specific deceased loved one by name and felt something shift, a sense of peace that arrived unexpectedly? A sudden, vivid memory of them, a dream in which they appeared to you looking well, a moment of release from grief that you cannot entirely explain. Many Catholics have had this experience and have never spoken about it because it does not quite fit into ordinary conversation, and they were not sure anyone would understand. I want you to share it here. Tell us who you are praying for today. Tell us what happened when you prayed for them specifically. These testimonies matter far more than you know, not only for the people who will read them, but for the truth they carry. That love does not stop at death, that prayer crosses the boundary between the living and the dead, and that the people we have lost are not beyond our reach. Write a name in the comments today. Say it aloud as you type it. They deserve to be remembered with exactly this kind of love.